DDoS, distributed denial of service. We've all heard about it. It's in the news. Maybe it even happened at a company that you work or have worked for. And if it did happen, you already know the effects of it can really just suspend an organization. Network access or resources come to a dead stop. Like in a good way, I guess if you want to see a positive, a DDoS is a good way to tell what systems, when they go offline, are the most crucial to your company, the ones which are most needed. Because when they're unavailable, that's when you know who needs them the most. Hopefully your company or any company conducted a solid business impact analysis to implement countermeasures or recovery strategies instead of having to wait for it to happen to them. Also, I just realized I just called this video DDoS. It's actually called DDoS Countermeasures. I'm not going to go over DDoS in this video. DDoS attacks the availability of our systems, okay? Availability. One of the three core CISSP concepts to understand. The other two being confidentiality and integrity. DDoS affects availability. DDoS or DOS is a really simple concept to understand. It's highly technical, but it's a simple concept to understand. It's a denial of service. It denies a certain service or resource to users, customers, vendors, whoever. Basically, someone who needs something isn't getting it. They're getting denied a service. I mean, if you unplug a coworker's power cord to their computer, or your friend or your family member's computer, you're denying them a service to their computer. You've executed a denial of service. I remember one of my friends went to take their CCIE exam, and they just couldn't get an interface up on an ASA firewall. They couldn't figure it out. They ran and he's a smart guy too. They ran the command to create the interface, did the no shut command, and a few other tips and tricks. Nothing. He only found out later that the exam lab he was in, which was a physical lab at the time, the test administrators had put a piece of tape on the Ethernet cable and plugged it into a specific port. It was never going to get a connection. There was never going to be any link. So my friend was so busy concentrating on the network and data link layer of the OSI model that he totally forgot to check layer 1, the physical layer. Tricky exam, that CCIE. Wish I had one though. A CCIE certificate, because like if you have a CCIE and a CISSP, man, you are set for life. You can command any salary and you'll never be out of work. Okay, trust me. Two of my friends have a CCIE and a CISSP. They both work in security, and you know, security itself is a high-paying job. It's probably the highest-paying IT sector there is. One of my friends has a salary of $250,000 per year working for Raytheon. And the other guy, he makes $450,000 a year consulting for security companies. Oh yeah, and he's also got a second job where he makes $135,000 a year as a salary. These guys, you know, they don't talk anything less than $120,000, $130,000 a year when it comes to talking about money and jobs. But the one who makes the other guy who has a second job for $130,000, he does that for the health insurance. He says he does it for the health insurance for his kids, and he also uses it to pay the taxes for his main job where he makes $450K a year. It's crazy. It's crazy. So when it's all said and done, he's really making $500,000 a year working in security, working at firewalls, doing network security. I'm not joking. He's my inspiration. He showed me that it's possible. It's possible to do that. So yeah, CCIE plus CISSP, you can live the life you want. Although the friend who makes $500,000 a year gets like 4 or 5 hours sleep a night, so I'm not sure if it's worth it. Then again, he's got 3 kids. Anyway, in this video, we're gonna go over DDoS countermeasures. Real quick, everyone know the difference between a DOS and a DDoS? A DOS is when just one computer from one single internet connection tries to launch a denial of service attack using various network methods. And we'll talk about those methods next. A DDoS is when multiple computers from multiple internet connections are used to launch attacks using various flooding methods. I'm not really going to go too much into the differences or definitions between DOS and DDoS because there are like a billion other videos on YouTube which do this already, and they probably do it better than me. I'm not going to sit here and be like, I'm about to make the greatest DDoS video there is, because I'm probably not. That's not my focus. My focus is the CISP. So there's tons of DDoS videos out there if you want to check those out. But I tell you what, there isn't a DDoS video that talks about it in relation to the CISSP. I bet I'm the only one, or one of few. I did have a video though, if you wanted to check it out. It's one of my really old videos. Domain 4 network security videos, page 1. In today's world, most denial of service attacks are DDoS, distributed denial of service. It's just more effective because our technology and network interface cards or security devices can probably handle a flood of packets from one machine. They can just easily block that one source machine. But with a DDoS, where thousands or hundreds of thousands of machines are flooding a system, it's tougher to block that. Okay? For this video, though, we're going to talk about the types of DDoS, the different countermeasures, and how they relate in terms of the CISSP exam, because that's what you're here for. Also, I said somewhere in my old DOS and DDoS video that I'd make a supplementary countermeasures video, and I never did, so this is it. Let's check out the different types of DDoS attacks first. There are a few different types of DDoS attacks targeting different types of resources. There's volume-based attacks, also called volumetric-based attacks, which comprises of a collection of computers which send either UDP, ICMP, and other types of packets all together, and preferably around the same time. The goal of volume-based attacks like this, where packets are sent in massive numbers, is to try and quench the bandwidth of the victim. Basically, what they're trying to do is slow down the performance of the internet speed by trying to push the network beyond its limit. Bandwidth in general is the measurement of the amount of information a network can handle at a given point of time. When networks exceed this capacity, that's when bandwidth saturation occurs. When too many things are going through the network, like when your internet's slow at home because someone's streaming Netflix all day, or at your office when too many people are on the wireless, probably streaming Netflix all day. Now, imagine it's your work internet, which is probably faster than your home internet. Imagine your work connection being completely slow, completely coming to a crawl. That's the power of a volume-based DDoS attack. And that's like another thing. Attackers do distributed denial of service not on our little home computers, but giant corporations with large resources. They're trying to knock those out. I've seen DDoS attacks come in at a rate of 10 gigabits per second. That's like a lot of packets in a really short time. It's crazy. I've seen that happen at what's the digital certificate company? VeriSign. I've seen that happen at VeriSign. It can bring the internet speed of a company to a grinding halt, totally preventing anyone from getting any work done. The different types of DDoS volume attacks include a lot of amplification attacks like NTP amplification, DNS amplification, and UDP flood and TCP flood, as we said earlier. Okay, that's volume-based attack. Not going to spend too much time on it. There's also DDoS protocol attacks. Protocol attacks are things like SYN floods or the ping of death, which isn't really used anymore because devices are smart enough to handle that now, and Smurf attacks. Unlike volume-based attacks, which focus on the network bandwidth, protocol attacks focus more on the servers or security devices, like the actual firewall. In a protocol attack, the attacker is trying to consume the processing power of the target, a specific target. So not the bandwidth like in volume-based attacks. A server or a firewall or a router, these devices have a maximum number of connections that they can handle. That's what what are you talking about? That is what a DDoS protocol attack is trying to do. It's trying to knock out that one device, trying to max out the connections on a certain device. For example, on a Palo Alto PA5520 firewall, it can handle a maximum of 4 million connections. On a Palo Alto 5260, that can handle 32 million maximum connections. And a Palo Alto 7080, the big boy Palo Alto firewall series, that can handle a whopping 80 million connections. That's a lot of individual connections. And remember, DDoS is multiple connections from multiple internet sources. Multiple computers from multiple internet connections, not just the same connection. So you can imagine just how large, to knock out a Palo Alto firewall, you can imagine just how large a distributed denial of service protocol has to be. It'd have to be connections in the hundreds of thousands. Hundreds and thousands of compromised computers, otherwise known as botnets. I emphasize that. Can you think of a way to compromise that many devices and create multiple botnets to launch an attack? How would we do that? How would we do that? I'll give you a hint. It's one of the new topics of the new updated CISSP exam. It's the Internet of Things, IoT. By compromising these millions of small devices with IP addresses, they can then be used to launch DDoS amplification or other types of attacks on a targeted victim. Read up on the massive DDoS attack which happened last year on our backbone internet DNS server called Mirai. Essentially, the attackers used malware to compromise and control millions of IoT devices and use them to launch DDoS, which knocked out Netflix. But yeah, that's how an attacker can send hundreds of millions of individual connections and requests to a victim computer. Okay? So a protocol DDoS attack is trying to destroy the availability of a specific device by maxing out their connections or another service like that. It tries to exploit vulnerabilities at layer 3 and 4 of the OSI model. And finally, there's application layer attacks for DDoS. The best way to describe application layer DDoS attacks is to think of an HTTP request. It involves what's known as a get and post request. And these are just very specific examples I'm using. This isn't the one-all, know-all. It's just a very specific example. In relation to get and post requests, both these types of requests are used to either retrieve remote data, insert, or update data. There's connections going back and forth. When floods of these types of requests are sent in the form of a distributed denial of service attack, it is meant to target the HTTP vulnerabilities on an Apache or Windows server, OpenBSD as well. What I'm trying to say is they pretty much just want to crash the web server application. It is specific to HTTP in our example. Okay, that's an application layer attack. They're meant to attack layer 7 of the OSI model. Just like the name says, they're targeting an application. They're not trying to manipulate the application transactions. I mean, they are trying to manipulate the application transactions. Not the bandwidth, not the appliance, the application. Okay, we went over 3 types of DDoS attacks. Volume-based attacks, which attack a network's bandwidth. Protocol attacks, which target a server or a security device. And application layer attacks, which target the specific application. Basically, if your organization has a system which needs to be up and running in order to sustain profitability, you're a target for DDoS. Okay, let's now check out some countermeasures as they relate to the CISSP exam. Before beginning, I just want to say that there are a ton of ways to mitigate DDoS. I can't touch on all of them in this video, but the official ISC Squared 4th edition CISSP study guide has things like disable echo replies in external systems, which is by default these days on firewalls, disable broadcast features on border systems, block spoof packets from entering or leaving your network. That's where anti-spoofing technology comes in. Keep all systems patched with the most current security updates from vendors, and consider commercial DDoS protection response services like Cloudflare DDoS mitigation or some other company. I'm going to touch on some of these and go into real specifics, but that's not the point of the video. The point of the video is to talk about these specific countermeasures, but then look at the CISSP high-level concept and how to think like a manager and why you would implement the countermeasures. Because you can find DDoS and DDoS countermeasure videos all over the net. That's not the intention of this video. I'm going to take 3 different ways to mitigate DDoS and apply what we have learned in our CISSP study guides and try to prove to you, the viewer, why this is a high-level based exam on concepts and fundamentals. Okay? Because no matter the countermeasure, there are always high-level principles behind it. And that's exactly what the CISSP exam is going to test you on. Okay? Let's check out the first countermeasure to a DDoS. Let's start off by getting technical with it. I mean really technical. I'm talking technical beyond the scope of the CISSP exam and even beyond the scope of some Cisco exams. Let's check out how a Cisco ASA firewall would mitigate an application level DDoS. Because for volumetric based DDoS, the ASA isn't going to help much. Remember, a volume-based DDoS wants to disrupt the bandwidth of the network. A single Cisco firewall isn't going to be any use against this. Volumetric DDoS has to be taken care of at the ISP level, or some third party. But the ASA can take care of an application attack using HTTP inspection from what is known as its modular policy framework. Okay? If it's an HTTP application DDoS, then there is usually an identifiable string or pattern which distinguishes it from other network traffic. This is what the Cisco ASA will use to prevent the attack, this unique signature that the DDoS will leave, this trail that the DDoS will leave. Remember, an application DDoS attack is trying to attack an application, a web server application most likely. A Cisco ASA firewall stands in front of a web server application to protect it from external threats. That's why we have it. Remember we talked about get and post commands earlier in the DDoS, different types of DDoS type slide? Well, when these requests are used in terms of a DDoS, some similar parameters can be identified in the form of a string, a common pattern, a common string. For example, if a website was getting hammered with requests, maybe the attack pattern would include something like this. this attack pattern, https victimserver.com/sample page 66823. The website would be www.victimwebserver.com, and the common parameter used would be sample page 66823. It's not important because anyway, the ASA would take this as a pattern, as a signature. The ASA we'd have to configure the ASA to use this signature of sorts. Now, what I'm about to show is super technical, and in no way, shape, or form do you have to know any of it for the exam. First, on the Cisco ASA firewall, we create what's known as a regular expression with the attack pattern. So something like this. As in, this is literally what we would type in the Cisco ASA firewall command line. Okay, so we'd first create that regex expression on the ASA. Regex expression is redundant. Regex stands for regular expression, so saying regex expression is redundant. I should have just said regex. We'd first create that regex on the ASA. And by the way, on an Cisco ASA command line, once you enter that command in configuration mode, then that's it. The firewall will run the command. Be very careful when you enter commands in configuration mode. There's no install button like Checkpoint firewalls or a commit button like Palo Alto firewall. So we created that expression, and now we're going to create an access control list, something like this. All this access list is saying is that any traffic which matches this access list and is TCP traffic coming from any, meaning anywhere on the internet, to this destination, the web server IP address, using the service of HTTP, or you can even say HTTPS, allow it. We're basically just allowing web traffic from the internet to the web server. And ideally, this has already been created on the firewall when it first came online, most likely, or whenever the web server was added to the network. Next, we're going to create the rules within Cisco's modular policy framework. Now it's going to get a little technical, but bear with me, it's just for a few minutes, and then we'll focus right back on the high-level CISSP concepts. Next, we create something called a class map. It looks something like this. We have created a class. If you were to think of it in terms of coding from your domain 8 terms, then a class is a reference point to a set of instructions. It's like a blueprint. So we create this class and put an object in there, an action. We tell this special set of instructions, this class, to match accessless web traffic, to match the traffic we created in the access list. On an ASA firewall, we have created a class, and the instruction within this class states to match the access list we created previously, this one right here. Okay, if you don't understand all that, don't worry about it. We're really just getting super technical here, or moderately technical, depending on your Cisco ASA firewall experience. Okay, next we create something called an inspection policy. This is a way to have the firewall to match the attack string we created with the regex command earlier. It looks something like this. This is known as a policy map inspection policy. It's basically issuing the command of creating a unique policy map called DDoS. Then within this policy map, we define a parameter. This parameter being to match the earlier regex string. And if the firewall matches the string coming into the network, it is to drop it. And it drops it with this drop connection command right here. After all, after all this, we then create a service policy group which matches for the policy map we created above. And we attach the service policy map to the outside interface of the firewall, because that's where the point of entry for a DDoS attack would occur, coming from the internet. That was a super duper technical way of implementing a countermeasure to a DDoS if using a specific attack string. Oh, and just to add a note, the Cisco ASA already comes with the default type of DOS protection. We just talked about implementing a very specific type of countermeasure, sometimes customized. You don't have to know any of this for the exam. So why are we talking about it? Because here are the high-level concepts to extract from this real-life implementation of a DDoS countermeasure for the CISSP exam.